Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us on our monthly Clavis Insight webinar. I'm Tom Golden from Clavis Insight, and I'm going to be emceeing our webinar today. Before we get started, I just want to go through a few housekeeping items. All participants are going to be on mute for the duration of this call. But we encourage people to ask questions, so please, if you have any questions to ask, can you please enter them in the question box, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. Okay, today's webinar is about how Amazon's innovations are changing online retail. It's kind of pretty timely, I think, coming less than a week after Amazon announced it is to acquire Whole Food Markets for $13.7 billion, and Wall Street rumors about even more acquisitions to come down the road. So proof of proof were needed that Amazon is intent on changing the retail landscape. It's not just the 70 or more acquisitions that Amazon has made in recent years, but innovations like Alexa, Echo, Prime, and other things that are conspiring to make online and omni-channel shopping more convenient for consumers around the globe, and at the same time challenging brand manufacturers to keep pace if they truly want to succeed in the new environment. We're going to explore some of these issues and themes over the next 40 minutes or so, 30 or 40 minutes or so. Our speakers today are Tim Barrett from Euromonitor and Danny Silverman from Clavis Insight. Tim is a senior research analyst at Euromonitor International, where he is involved in both primary and secondary research across the retail sector. He's got a special interest in e-commerce and the evolving grocery landscape and the growth of online marketplaces. And our own Danny Silverman leads our product and corporate marketing at Clavis, and he's an established industry thought leader with nearly 20 years' experience in helping consumer product brands grow online presence and sales. So I'm going to start by handing over to Tim to get going, and he's going to talk through the bulk of the presentation before we move on to Danny for the next part. Tim, over to you.
Thanks, Tom. And thank you, everybody, for joining us, and good afternoon today. I also want to thank real quick Clavis just as the company for having me. Always a pleasure to work with you guys. Without further ado, let's get this thing started. So today I will be talking to you guys about Amazon's innovation and industry impact internationally. What that means is we're just kind of go broadly over what Amazon's all about. And Tom was totally right. Amazon is a company that changes all the time. In fact, I write and present about Amazon fairly often, and no matter what I do, I think, oh, I can just use my presentation or my stuff about Amazon from last month, and that is rarely the case. I always have to be adding things or changing things. The company moves insanely fast, as we've seen through the Whole Foods stuff. So just always a good company to cover, even if you have to constantly kind of readapt to what you're looking at. Before we get into kind of what Amazon does, first I just want to give you a little bit of background on Euromonitor, my company. So I am the senior analyst for the retailing team. We do retail in 100 countries now. Across the world, and that's kind of our big claim to fame is our international basis. We've got analysts on the ground in each of those 100 countries, from which we're managed, in 12 kind of regional hubs. I personally live in Chicago, and therefore am exposed to a lot of the North America research, but within my remit covers the entire world. So. How does Amazon innovate, and specifically, how did they do it, internationally? We're going to get into that a little bit later, but first we're going to talk about Amazon's general playbook. Then we're going to go into kind of how they, get customers hooked on their Prime program. After that, we'll talk about the hardware ecosystem and what that does for them. Following that, we'll deal with the traditional retail components of their business. And then we're going to do the kind of way they're changing the logistics industry, and then also, their final kind of impact and key takeaways. So, what is Amazon's culture all about? I believe it's about four things. The first and foremost is customer obsession. If you've ever seen Amazon present at a conference, this is the thing they love to talk about. We're customer-centric. They basically think they invented the word. And to be fair, they do a really good job. They're always kind of adapting and changing and trying to do what they want, that they think that the customers will like. Opening their marketplace was a big component of this, which, at first they thought, why should we be opening a marketplace from which, we can host our competitors? But actually turned out to be more of a symbiotic relationship. And it turns out the customers really wanted it because it helps increase their, overall merchandise platform. Next up, they have a passion for invention. They really do think and act like a tech company, and they're constantly churning new things out. So the idea that nothing should ever kind of stay still for a long time, they're very much like a shark in that manner, and others. Also, they have a very long-term attitude. This is obvious in the fact that everybody always talks about, they don't have to have profits necessarily. They have a unique shareholder base and kind of understands this vision, and they're in it for the long haul. And the long haul means, getting kind of, share of total wallet, and, embedding themselves in the lives of all their customers, even if it means selling things at a loss, or, just at cost. And then finally, it's operational excellence. None of these three things would be possible if they weren't always focused on being efficient and kind of getting gains wherever they can. And how do they go about these things? Generally speaking, they do it. What's the philosophy behind the business model? And a lot of times, it's talked about as a flywheel. And for those that are unfamiliar with the term, flywheel is essentially a kind of self-sustaining type of model, which starts out with a little bit of momentum, and then once you get that momentum, you can end up turning it into more momentum. And that is essentially using kind of the four: selection, customer experience, traffic, sellers is the flywheel, and then the momentum is the lower cost structure and the lower prices, and that's your wind. And once the breeze gets going, it's easy to kind of turn that into more motion and more forward momentum, which is the growth. And actually, I think this is there's different ways to portray the flywheel, and I've seen it portrayed even differently by people who work at Amazon. But I like this graphic because this is the one that's been purported to have been drawn on a napkin by Jeff Bezos himself in a bar before Amazon existed, or when it was very new. So this was kind of the original conception of the flywheel. So for all those that are wondering how it began, this is a cool little insight into that. And so then we've got kind of what Amazon focuses on, and what's their philosophy, what's their basic operational playbook. And I think these four things, and they all kind of feed into each other. The first is that they advocate agile startup principles. They're all about moving quickly. They're not afraid to fail. I think their biggest kind of high-profile failure was their phone that they made out in 2014, and that was pretty expensive. They ended up taking a pretty big loss on that, and nobody really liked it. But we don't really talk about it anymore, and they're still doing extremely well. So just kind of goes to show you that you don't have to kind of put all your eggs in one basket, and even when you have big, high-profile things, just because they don't do well doesn't mean you can't brush yourself off and keep at it. And they have a bunch of other irons in the fire too, so that always helps. Once they do establish something that works really well, they also, this is actually a little separate. So they also try to leverage the existing infrastructure. When it first started out in the U.S. at least, that means, and in actually many countries nationally, it has to do with getting the appropriate relationships with delivery companies. And now they're actually branching into their own logistic capabilities. But when it started, it's using things that are already built in the country and using kind of the habits already established there. So they'll do whatever they can, whether it's internally or externally, to use their own stuff. Internationally, it actually tends to be things that they've built for the U.S. that they can just port over to international businesses. So once they've got kind of a working idea, proof of concept, and they've got the infrastructure they need, then they start to actually start to scale it. they realize that, okay, something is working and we have the ability to move it up forward, they do so, and they do so relatively quickly. And then finally, once all this is up and running and pretty successful in a kind of more sophisticated and widespread manner, then they try to open up the infrastructure to others. It's their marketplaces, it's their Echo and Alexa APIs. It's all these sorts of things that okay, now we've got this really good tech, and we want to open it up to others so that it becomes the first place, the top of the funnel, which is something they do really well. And what does this translate into? It translates into a lot of things like revenue, share of wallet, stuff like that. But it's clear that it also translates into share price for those of us who are concerned about such things. And just keeps on shooting up. And this is this is out of date now that I'm looking at it. It just keeps going up regardless of the fact that while their profits are low, they're not minimal. Or they're not zero, and once they get to a point where they're truly comfortable, they could get even higher. So after that, we're going to talk, how now we've got the basics of how Amazon operates. How do they lock in loyalty? And that's with Prime, Amazon Prime. And so the idea is that they keep on adding functionality to Prime, and they're going to do so until they feel like it's irresponsible for you not to be a member. And they do a pretty good job of that. Before we get into this, what Prime offers, I think it's important to realize who Prime is for. And so this is some data from our friends over at Prosper Insights. And it goes over just kind of I think this is only for the U.S., but I think it's applicable worldwide. And it goes over kind of Amazon shoppers by income. And you'll see that the orange bar is Amazon Prime shoppers, and the blue bar is just regular Amazon shoppers. And you'll see that the orange bar actually peaks a little bit later and is weighted more towards the right side of the chart, which essentially means that Amazon Prime shoppers are actually higher income. And this makes a lot of sense, particularly in light of their Whole Foods acquisition. There's a lot of customer overlap, so that's who Prime shoppers are for. It's for people who shop a lot, for people who maybe have more money than time, and who have like a desire to use all the services that Amazon actually offers on Prime. And what are these services? Some of you might just be thinking, well, yeah, Prime is the thing that helps me get free shipping. And believe me, that's probably the most valuable component of it. At least I know why I keep repaying $100 a year. But it actually does a lot more than just free shipping these days. And you expect this to be added on to quite a bit in the future. In terms of content, we have Prime Video. They've got a number of award-winning TV shows and movies now, in addition to having their own licenses from other companies. They also have Prime Twitch, which I find is actually less known, unless you happen to be into video games. Prime Twitch is their big entry into streaming, similar to YouTube, but with more of a targeted audience. Twitch is started out as just a streaming website for live streaming, specifically for video games, but has since moved on to live streaming for pretty much anything. I've heard there's just people who put it on in their apartments and let people kind of watch them Truman Show style. So it's definitely branching out, and the company paid Amazon paid $1 billion for this company, and they get a ton of views. And this is kind of their hit back at Google for saying that YouTube's not going to be the only place where people go to watch live videos or videos at all. Also, they have a ton of services. The two most prominent, I think, are Prime Now, which is kind of their Instacart, Postmates-esque hyperlocal delivery service, which also does food in addition to products, which is really good. And then it also has Amazon Fresh, which you may be more familiar with, which is kind of their online grocery, built from the ground up to be online, does fresh, does packaged food, does kind of everything. And then finally, they actually offer exclusive products as well. In addition to games that they do offer that have been kind of developed with them and only on Amazon, and they also offer a number of private labels, which we'll actually get a little bit into later. They're branching out very very much in a private label, largely with clothing, but also trying to move on into foods and home care as well. So they're using private label to try and branch out into areas where they don't maybe have as much product coverage, but they do have private label in areas where they are known for, like Amazon Basics being their kind of electronics accessories private label, which I know does pretty well. And next up, we'll be talking about kind of the hardware component of their system. And hardware is actually kind of a loss leader for them. At the very least, we think that they're selling at a cost. And they've gone out and admitted this in past annual reports. They have started with their Kindle, then they moved into the Fire tablet, then they moved into kind of TV dongles and sticks. Then more recently, they started with the Echo and the Dash, and then they've kind of been evolving the Echo. Most recently this year, they released the Echo Show, which is that two-way kind of video conference system with the Alexa technology built into it. And all of this stuff helps to lock people into the Amazon ecosystem. If you can create an ecosystem, that's great, but getting people to use it is even greater. And they've done a pretty good job of doing that by making this stuff all as cheap as possible, but also making it as good as possible. While maybe they haven't done too much with the Fire tablet because the tablet market is pretty saturated these days, they keep updating the Kindle. And the Kindle is still, just a grade A quality product, particularly the Paperwhite. So keep looking on them to do that for all of their products, including the Echo family, which is their latest and greatest. And I think, this is really the tech future for Amazon, at least so far. We never know what they're going to come out with in the future, but it's clear that this is going to be a large focus area for them. And why is that? Well, what's going to do is allow them to create kind of an IoT, a hub for the future. People talk about IoT a lot. What does it mean? What does it do? Could mean a lot of things. But for the time being, what you need to actually have, you need to have a hub. And the way I've heard it framed, which I love to think about, is that Alexa isn't just a voice recognition virtual assistant, which it is. It's actually an operating system, and it just happens to be a voice operating system. And the fact that while the research is still pretty new on this industry, I've seen figures that seem to indicate that Alexa has more share of personal assistant, voice-operated personal assistants than other companies. If you can get that and become the most used voice operating assistant, or even just one of the most used, you've essentially established yourself as a voice-first operating system. And once you have your own operating system, you have a number of network effects and business opportunities that stem from that. Now you've got people coming to you for a number of reasons because they want to be on your operating system because your operating system is the top of the funnel. And if, like me, you think that voice operation is a way that we're going to be interacting with our computers even more, particularly as more elderly people become the digital natives move into kind of more of an elderly state where maybe typing on screens isn't quite so easy. And where just simply talking to robots becomes more commonplace and easier to do because they understand us and they understand our normal speech patterns. Because the tech is more advanced, it's just going to become much bigger. So them being at the top of the game there has really positioned themselves for success. Oops, sorry about that. And then also they have their Dash stuff. And the Dash buttons are interesting, I think, but I think more interesting because everybody always Dash buttons are pretty well known as their Dash replenishment system, which is a little bit different. That's what this slide is about. Dash replenishment system is something that lets them do automatic replenishment, and it allows them to actually hook up with a number of independent suppliers, typically appliance people. And what the Dash replenishment system does is lets the actual appliances themselves be smart. Lets the appliances themselves understand when the product or kind of the refillable item inside is done with and needs to be reordered, and then reorders it automatically. So here you've got kind of, the dash buttons are a little bit gimmicky, and everybody always wonders what they're actually for. And while I think they're just establishing, behavioral patterns for when they move those buttons to be digital only, they also are using the technology of Dash to help with replenishment in other ways. So it's not just push a button replenishment when on your terms. It's seamless replenishment. It's replenishment on that you don't even have to think about. And they've already been moving that way with subscribe and save. And now they're working with suppliers to move even further to that. And if they can provide value to people who, are clearly buying these smart devices and have a little bit extra money to spend on a smart appliance, it's clear that they don't want to have enough money not to have to think about when they're ordering refills. And so removing the friction from that purchase, now they've moved from one-click shopping to no-click shopping. And a lot of people are going to appreciate that. And we're going to see that become a bigger thing, just like we have with general subscribe and save. It's kind of repeat subscription type services. And so next up, we're going to talk about Amazon's international footprint. This is the purpose of this specific webinar. If you're looking into U.S. insights, we'll be doing that a little bit later today. So for internationally, Amazon's marketplace is still a huge deal. It's the way they've even come into some markets like India. Amazon isn't just its own retailer, and this is part of their retail blood nowadays, because here you've got kind of global sales by Amazon themselves in blue, and then third parties in orange. And you can see that the orange has gotten quite a bit bigger in recent years. Simple fact of the matter is that Amazon's business relies on other people's retail businesses being opened up on their platform, and helps them, like I said earlier, establish more merchandise on their store than they could ever hope to have. And it also helps them, A, be more profitable, because the take rate is 100% profit after. And then also it helps them kind of not have to deal with inventory risk. So clearly very valuable to them, very valuable to customers, very valuable to the businesses that host on there, and that helps them just generate network effects across the board. But moving into their actual international sales, here we have an interesting kind of slide that we work on in-house, and this shows you share of international sales. And the orange line is Amazon's reported international share, and the blue line is Euromonitor's estimated international share. And you might be thinking, how can you estimate something different than what they report? And what we do actually is we try to take into account cross-border commerce or Euromonitor. And what that means is that we're concerned about where the actual purchaser is located, not where the sale is made. Amazon doesn't care about where the purchaser is located. They only care about where the sale is made. And it's a pretty obvious fact that not everybody that orders from Amazon.com is going to actually be from the U.S. In fact, it's well reported that due to tariffs and things like that, sometimes it's easier to order from Amazon.com, and sometimes it's easier to order from Amazon.com, send it to courier services in, say, Florida, and then have it shipped to, let's say, South America, Brazil, after the fact. And these sorts of services, and just ordering directly from Amazon.com, actually gives them a much larger share of international sales than one might think simply by reading their report. And so this is our best guess at what we think the real international share is. And you can see that it's actually growing. So we believe that while Amazon's purported domestic sales are actually growing, that just means that the demand for international Amazon sales, to the extent that it is built out in the U.S., has yet to be satisfied. And here's a quick look at their core markets. I'm going to let you kind of just take just a second to kind of parse some of this information, but I would like to let you know that the most pertinent column here is the rightmost column, where you can see a number of ones and twos, and the lowest one being a 6, which is China, which we're going to get into in the next slide. But it's easy to say from a quick glance at this chart and the number of kind of where they're ranked, that wherever Amazon tries to move, it tends to do pretty well. And sorry, before we get into China, there's just one more thing that I want to talk about in terms of countries they're present in. And that happens to be the fact that they are present in these 3 countries, but they're actually not opening full sites. They're not core markets. In these 3 countries, they only operate, it's ebook only, and they do also sell Kindles. But it's like Amazon from the early 90s or the late 90s, except they also have Kindles. They only do the books, and they're building themselves out as kind of that, which is fine. That's how they want to open in their countries. That's their right. It limits the risk. It lets them build the brand. But more interesting, it's actually, I think, when you think about how they open internationally, I think that you can think of this as sort of soft openings. They just did it in Mexico, and then they transitioned to, where Mexico is a full-fledged retail operation now. And they're selling hard goods in addition to just books and things like that. And they're rumored heavily to do so in Australia. In fact, Bezos has confirmed it. So if we want to try and predict where Amazon's going to be opening up next, I'd say look no further than Brazil and the Netherlands. So what about China? I know we mentioned them earlier. And the fact is that China, they actually haven't done so well. Now, for those in the know, probably say, well, yeah, that's because Alibaba grew. And they did. You're right. In fact, Alibaba started in 2009, which is just about when Amazon kind of started to decline. But as you can see, Amazon's actually been in the country since 2007, and they did okay. So the question then becomes, so what happened? Was it just because Alibaba came and China kind of suppressed Amazon because that's sometimes what they do, and for the sake of having a domestic firm, also because domestic firms actually just know the Chinese consumers better, and some of that may have come into play. But really, I think the real reason is that Amazon just dropped the ball. Amazon just didn't really know what they were doing, and what they tried to do, which is what they do a lot, is they tried to apply the model that they thought worked in the U.S. Across the board, and then they just did what they did in the U.S. and they thought that would work, and Chinese customers didn't really like it. In fact, this was before Alibaba came about, so payments weren't easy. People weren't used to buying online in China, and Amazon didn't really care. They didn't have services like cash on delivery, which helps skeptical first-time online buyers get over the fact that they're sending their money out into the ether and just expecting that people and businesses will be good enough to give them the products that they want in the condition that they want. And that's just not how a lot of people operate before they've been conditioned to buy online. But they didn't care. They didn't want to do that. They didn't do that, and then they ended up losing share pretty significantly, amongst other reasons. And because of that, they're still in China, and they are still doing certain things that aren't interesting. But if personally, I'm ready to call it and just say that that's Alibaba's market. Tmall and Taobao have the lion's share of things, and if anybody's going to take anything from them, it's JD.com, and they already are. And Amazon is left kind of playing sixth fiddle at this point. But like we said, Amazon's not afraid to fail, and they do hate failing. Don't get me wrong. You can actually still see. Every once in a while, when I'm reading, reports of either investor relations or stuff in the press, Bezos throws around some kind of hurt feelings about China being tough to get into, and he's clearly made it his own personal crusade to not have the same thing happen in India. And to be fair, they're doing a really good job. It helps when you plow, $5 billion into the country. But they're doing things where they're learning. They learn from China. They've got cash on delivery. They focused on logistics first because the infrastructure in India is not as strong as it is in many other countries. They're doing marketplace only, which was a necessity at the time because of the way Indian investment from foreign entities has to work. But it ended up working really well because now they don't have to do any inventory risk, and it's all local merchants stocking the Amazon shelves. They've got Prime that's really cheap for Indian consumers, and they're now working with Bollywood to actually make Bollywood-based Prime video, help build that from scratch too. So they've also hired a lot of locals, and locals are helping to drive the strategy as opposed to seems like they did with China. And in doing so, they've gained a lot of share in a short amount of time. And they've also caused a ton of other investment because everybody realizes that India is kind of before the peak growth or kind of the big growth area. Like they've expected it for a long time, to be fair. But there is still the expectation that it will happen eventually. So we've got Snapdeal here that we know Alibaba is invested in, and Alibaba also has just a big investment in a big stake in Paytm, which is the largest mobile wallet, and they just opened a mobile first marketplace. And Flipkart has been rumored to be acquired or maybe have a stake purchased in it by eBay. So Indian retail market certainly heating up before growth gets really big. A lot of people think that e-commerce in India is still for very high income, highly urban markets or consumers, but Amazon is trying to change that with their investments. So that's how Amazon is reinventing retail internationally. How is it doing so? And I think the underpinning for that is the logistics. The loyalty and the hardware are certainly big components, but I think they're a little bit bigger in the U.S., which is why we talk about them first. I think it's the logistics that they really focus on. And what does that deliver? What is that? It delivers delivery, and it delivers it even faster. It started with 2-day a while ago with Prime, and then now we've moved into hourly delivery, and soon enough we're going to be instant delivery. We all joke about they came out with a kind of drone patent, and it seems kind of silly at first, but the more you talk about it, the more you work it out. You think like, man, if they really get past regulatory things, it's certainly possible. They've got their floating fortress that could sit outside cities and just kind of have drones be going back and forth to it. For people, speculate that what if they just buy big skyscrapers in the middle of a city and they just have that be drone central? What if they buy up old post offices that aren't even being used anymore? They've got patents for drones that sit on top of lampposts and they charge that way, which would be an interesting way to do it. So there are a lot of cultural things about this, but they're clearly trying to make it work. And while I thought it was a gimmick at first, every day I become a little bit more of a believer. So they're definitely going their way to making everything as smooth and as fast as possible. And how are they doing this? Well, they're doing it by building up just their actual infrastructure. They're on their, I believe, 8th generation of warehouse, which is now highly automated, run by Kiva robots, their acquisition they made a while ago, and just extremely efficient and built from the ground up. Here, their prime now warehouses are something to behold because they're in the middle of the cities and they've got drive-through components and they're just super efficient in the dense areas where it's more difficult to do that. They've also got airplanes now. Not only do they lease airplanes, but they also build their own. I think they're going to try and have 40 by the end of this year, or at least that's just kind of the first chapter is have 40. And they're doing this to put pressure on delivery companies. Deliver their own goods when they need it, to have more flexible demand for high impact seasons like Christmas. And yeah, just the fact that they're building airplanes is pretty impressive. They're even building their own air hub in Cincinnati, Ohio in the US. And then finally, this one is really flown under the radar, I've found. They've got their own ocean freighters now. The idea here is probably has to do with China. And to be honest, it probably has to do more with the US. The issue with having ocean freighters is that the way ocean freighters operate is that they get manifests of all the stuff and the cost on board. So having people, retailers in kind of markets where they have a large presence actually ship on these freighters doesn't make a lot of sense, because then you have to give them all your pricing information, assuming I have the understanding correctly of the freight business, which isn't my forte. But Assuming that is correct, that makes it a no-go for retailers where Amazon is your competitor. But in China, where the market has been basically ceded to Alibaba and JD.com now, they can actually afford to do that, and now they open themselves up to Chinese manufacturers, which we all know are a lot cheaper, and we all know Amazon loves to have its products be cheaper. And while it's a little bit more difficult to get around that with them being overly large and unable to avoid taxes, tax breaks, maybe they can do it with getting more Chinese goods. So what is their overall impact on retail? Well, first of all, they're setting expectations. As we kind of try to coalesce this into, so what? They're setting expectations is the easy first part. This is kind of some Euromonitor survey data, and it's just basically the real simple question: why do you buy online? And these are the top 3 answers globally for people who are already online buying. Or no, they have access to online, but obviously if they're buying online, they're already online buying. And the first 2 are, best price and free shipping. They're cost related. Amazon is builds itself when it enters a market. It builds itself as a price leader, and that it still holds true. In markets where it's more established, it's maybe a little bit less than that because competitors have caught up and it already has the benefit of being known as a low-cost leader. So they can kind of move a little bit more expensive in some areas. But it still is it's always competitive, even if it's not the lowest. And the free shipping helps further entrench itself as a low-cost leader. Because even if the price is comparable to other websites or other stores, the fact that it's free shipping is just bonus value to me. So all things being considered, I don't have to go to a store to get it. That is actually a more valuable item. And then, third, it was a little bit lower, but still important, is variety. And we all know because of the importance of Amazon's marketplace, variety is something it does better than anybody else. And if it's setting expectations, what is the impact on overall sales? And well, this chart is a little bit more staggering when you look at it in the U.S., where it has even more pull. I think it's still pretty significant globally. And so here what you're looking at in the blue bar is retailing absolute growth for the past 9 years, so excluding the internet. So this is store-based retailing. So this is also, we use this to kind of quell fears about, well, stores aren't going anywhere. It's like, well, listen, like internationally, retailing is still majority growth coming from stores. That being said, it's very clear that internet growth is, about a little bit more than half of that. So still, very significant. It's about a third of total growth. And then Amazon is a not insignificant portion of that. So this, I think, is the easiest way to quantify, Amazon's impact on sales overall, and also put it into kind of both the context of the internet and retailing overall, and store-based retailing. And so what will they do? I think an anecdote is important here, particularly internationally. And the anecdote revolves around their private label. And the private label is something that they're pushing, particularly when it comes to selling clothing. And actually, so they've got 2 things that I'm kind of talking about here. One is their show, Style Code Live. And this is what they were doing. They were trying to ape QVC and HSN and those companies, the home shopping companies, where they have shows and just people talking live, and then you watch the show and maybe you buy the products that they host. And it was a valiant effort, but to be fair, that's not what people wanted to do on Amazon, and they actually have since very recently canceled the show. But it was a big platform for the private label, which they're pushing really hard, and they're actually doing, from what I hear, a pretty good job of. At least in the U.S., I know they're rumored to be the largest seller of clothing online as of this year. And they're doing so with private labels, not just Amazon. And it's not just, Amazon branded clothing, even though they do have a little bit of that. It's fantasy brands like Lark & Row, and it's just one example. They've got a ton. And these are actually going to move forward. So here we've got examples of them pushing in a private label in clothing pretty hard, and they're doing so in a way where they're taking what works, which is the fantasy brands, and they're dropping the experiments that don't, which is Style Code Live. So what? There we go. Okay. So what? Well, you can see that they're starting this in North America, which is in the middle of the chart here, which is kind of the share of private label of all footwear and apparel. But you'll see in Australia and Western Europe, there's actually a much higher share of private label. Clearly, people are more willing to buy private label in these countries. And that gives Amazon a much larger opportunity. Once they figure out how to work private label in the U.S., they'll do so in these countries as well. And not to say that they aren't already doing it. And the main point is that, of this anecdote, is that Amazon looks to expand internationally what works in the U.S. It typically starts its initiatives in the U.S. and then rolls them out internationally. It gets them honed. It knows, that its bread and butter is still the U.S. of A, and it doesn't want to, bring its research out of there. So anything that it figures works there, it can tweak and adapt for the rest of its markets. And I think, greater example then is that I just took just the other day off their Amazon kind of Australia website, where it's clear that they're moving a marketplace there. So just one other previous experiment now being populated in a number of countries, including soon to be Australia. So what are the key takeaways here? Well, the first is that Amazon is built for innovation. The flywheel works. The second is that this innovation spans all areas. It's loyalty, it's hardware, it's retail, it's logistics, which is, pretty mind-boggling, yet it is the way things are. And so the third is that Amazon's innovations just simply make it a leader in retail, which is kind of what we're all here for in the first place. And the fact that it has all these innovations means that you're going to have to differentiate where you can and adapt to new norms where you must. And what does that mean? Because that's really the most important thing. And, so differentiation, you got to try and do what you can do differently than Amazon. Sometimes that means, focusing on quality. Maybe that means focusing on just, being unique, focusing on service, having the human touch, those sorts of things. Focusing on brand where Amazon's not strong in yet, like food. Although, with the Whole Foods acquisition, that may very well change. Those sorts of things. And then adapt to new norms where you must. You can't beat Amazon when it comes to free shipping. So you kind of have to meet it there. And so that's that. For me, I want to thank you all and then hand it over to Danny for the rest of.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tim. Hugely informative, and hope everybody enjoyed that and learned something from it. As a reminder, if you have questions, please feel free to use the Q&A on the side of your screen and queue them up. I'm going to take about 5 minutes, and we'll leave the 10 minutes at the end for any questions for Tim or myself. As Tom mentioned, I lead marketing here at Clavitz Insight. I'm also passionate about Amazon. I called on them in a previous life. Understand them now both from a strategic as well as all the way down to the source code level based on what we do here at Clavitz Insight. So what I wanted to do was build on Tim's points with a little bit of specifics in terms of what do we do in terms of how do we manage Amazon? What are the things to focus on to grow your business and grow your brands on Amazon? So we're going to take a look at what it takes to analyze and get insights into what can be optimized. In order to do this, I'm going to pause for just a second and introduce our 6Ps e-commerce analytics framework. This is something that we'll be sharing more broadly in the very near future. We'll have a white paper and a future webinar going deeper, so I'm just going to cover it at a high level. But essentially, this is a very powerful framework that is going to feel familiar and yet help organize and prioritize work that needs to be done. So we think about 6Ps. Here's how it works. Basically, it's an adaptation of the 4Ps original model with the addition of two more pieces, which is to accommodate e-commerce, which is perfect page, and then performance, which I'll cover in a moment. These first 5 Ps are what's within the manufacturer's control. You can determine what your assortment is, work with keeping it in stock, where it's going to be categorized on the retailer page in most cases, influence your cost of goods, your promotional plan, and ultimately you typically have a tremendous amount of influence on creating that perfect product detail page. These 5 Ps then drive the 6th P, which is performance. And we measure performance in e-commerce not just with sales and share, but with search as well, both search rank and share of search. It's a great proxy that you can look at across all retailers and even across global markets and countries, because search is something that tells you how your brands are performing, not only online but also in terms of influencing offline purchases, because so much product research is now being done online. So we've taken that framework and applied it to Amazon Analytics here as well. And so I'm just going to cover each of these in just a moment, but sort of going around the wheel, sort of starting around 1 o'clock, and we'll go counterclockwise. Perfect page, looking at things like what's the content on the page, is it accurate and up to date, what are shoppers saying about your product, is there enough reviews, all of those kinds of things go into optimizing the page. On the product side, as I mentioned, what's your assortment and is it in stock? On the placement side, that has lots to do with retailer categorization and cross-categorization. But when it comes to Amazon and marketplace retailers, increasingly you also have to understand how you're in there versus 3P sellers. And there's a lot of work around placement and categorization that can happen that's within your span of influence to deal with 3P sellers, whether it's working with them or looking to suppress them in some form to make sure your listings stay on top. From a price standpoint, of course, there's a cost of goods calculation there. There's other capabilities that won't apply to all markets. In some markets, we have different approaches here depending on what the legal situation is country by country. And finally, on the promotion side, what your promotions plan and using Amazon Marketing Services or AMS to increase that media presence. And finally, looking at your sales and your best sellers, category share, and search rank to measure your performance. Just a couple slides here to go one level deeper to help you understand what I'm talking about. And while this is Amazon specific, it really can be something you can learn from for all retailers. I would argue that Amazon's capabilities are more sophisticated than just about any other retailer. So if you really get to understand how to optimize Amazon, every other retailer is going to feel a lot more familiar and almost easier to approach. So first we look above the fold and we want to know things like, is the image correct? Do you have secondary images filling out to the extent of the retailer's capability? Is there video on the page if they support it? We then get to the specific buy box. The buy box refers to what is the current price and who is the seller that is selling the first listing that's available. What you'll learn if you don't know already is everything else on the page is static. Even if you lose the buy box, so if a third-party seller wins buy box because you're out of stock, for example, everything else like image and content stays the same. So within that buy box is the product in stock, who is the seller who has it, and what's the current price, both for a one purchase and subscribe and save if it's on subscription. And finally, are the pages variated among flavors and sizes? And then we get down into specific things around the third-party sellers. Are there sellers with a lower price? Are they offering a different variation? Who are they? What's their reputation? Are they sellers that are okay in getting product from a legitimate source, or is it a seller that you want to work with, or is it a seller that needs to be approached differently? When you start to get below the fold, obviously we're looking for two things, of course, A+ and enhanced content to the extent that retailers support it. Of course, Amazon supports A+ pages, and they're strongly recommended across all of your pages, but particularly your most popular items. You also get into how your AMS and promotional campaigns are performing, and understanding that can really help optimize your performance. And then there's also shopper-generated content. So this now breaks down into two parts, particularly with Amazon. Ratings and reviews, typically we're familiar with, but there's also Q&A on more and more retailer sites where shoppers are leaving questions and other shoppers are answering them. And we want to look at things like how many Q questions and answers are there, what are they asking, how many ratings and reviews, and are there any keywords that are popping up there that might give you some information about how to further optimize your content and the product messaging that you're sending. From a performance analytics standpoint, there's a number of different tools that you can look at. But for example, how is my business trending and where are there product exceptions that need to be addressed? Understanding best sellers on Amazon is really important. That's going to be the 80-for-20 rule, and making sure that those top or 20% of your, driving 80% of your sales are fully optimized and in stock at all times. Tracking your revenue versus your revenue goals for the year, Looking at margin analytics, for those who aren't familiar, Amazon has a term called CRAP, can't realize any profit. These are products that Amazon may have been shipping, but determines that they can't profitably continue to do so. And very often without the manufacturer's knowledge, it'll get assigned a CRAP status, it gets delisted. And so having the analytics to be able to proactively address that can be really critical here as well. And then finally, of course, what is my category share and how am I performing relative to my competitors? So that is, the super quick tour of Amazon and Amazon Analytics. On other webinars, we'll have opportunities to go into much more detail, and always happy to answer direct questions as well via email or future conference calls. But in the meantime, we did want to open it up to Q&A and take our last few minutes here. If you have any questions for Tim or for me, please use the Q&A section. Everybody will remain on mute, but we're looking at the questions that are coming in via the Q&A chat, and Tom is queuing them up for us right now.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you, Tim, for great insights there on Amazon and what they're doing. So we're in the Q&A portion, as Danny says. We don't have a huge amount of time left, so but we've got quite a few questions lined up already. So if you want to answer more questions, please do. If we don't get to answer them now, we'll come back to you on an individual basis afterwards. I have one question here, and possibly, Danny, I think you kind of answered it mostly in your last few minutes there. There are many levers to pull on Amazon, things like content, media, ratings and review. Where's the best place to start for brands? I guess that is kind of what we were just talking about there, the 6 Ps of e-commerce analytics. Maybe there's a more basic...
Yeah, at the end of the day, and this is going to be true of e-commerce, any retailer there is out there, being in stock is the first place to start. It's a little bit harder to do in e-commerce, perhaps not always obvious that that's going to be more difficult in e-commerce than in brick and mortar, but inventories tend to be leaner and more just in time, and demand spikes can quickly put products out of stock. And once you're out of stock, all the other efforts really don't matter. You're going to lose weight in terms of search rank, and it's going to ultimately affect sales, not just in the immediate while you're out of stock, but in the longer term. So beyond the 6 Ps, when we get asked the question, what's the most important, where should I start if I'm going to start anywhere, it'd be focusing on getting and staying in stock, particularly on your best sellers.
Thanks, Danny. And maybe here's another one, and maybe I'll pass this over to Tim to give him a chance to say something. You mentioned that Alexa and voice recognition in general will become more and more relevant as time goes on. What role do you think brands will play in adapting to the new technologies?
This is a fantastic question. Good pick, Tom. I think this stems to actually a little bit what Danny touched on, that buy box. From what we've heard, that's going to be even more integral to win because there's going to be less searching going on via Alexa and via the Echo products. Either you're going to know what brand you already want and you're going to say, buy me Kleenex, or you're not going to know and you're going to say, buy me tissues. At which point, whoever already owns the buy box will just be sent to you, and for the sake of seamlessness. So it's going to make winning the buy box online even more important.
Thanks. Danny, do you have anything to add on the voice recognition?
Yeah, it's interesting because now that we have Amazon Show coming in and releasing hopefully this month, which adds a display screen, there's sort of this thought of, well, actually, does that bring the screen back? But it really doesn't, because it's still a voice-driven device. And making sure that you're either already in the list or you're one of those best sellers that Amazon is going to recommend becomes really important. We tend to think, I think the general consensus is shifting, is just as once we didn't even have the idea of a mobile phone and then smartphones replaced what are now called dumb phones, the future of smartphones, there will be something that replaces them, and it's probably going to be related to voice. So we're certainly in the super early days, but watch it very closely because this is probably not just the future of e-commerce, but technology overall in general.
Thanks, Danny. Another question here about private label area. So, Tim, you were saying that a lot of it has been focused on the clothing area. What other categories do you think Amazon is going to go into in this private label area? The question, there was one question around, is pet care, are they going to go into pet care, et cetera?
I think on a long enough timeline, you're going to see them at least try to get into everything. I haven't seen anything specific from pet care, and I don't think it's a focus for them, although considering their customer base, it actually probably is not a bad idea. However, their focus right now is still on building out apparel, which in some cases they need to build the market for, at least in terms of buying online, and also food. Food is going to be tougher for them. They have some lines like Happy Belly and Mama Bear, things like that. They're going a little bit higher quality, and they're going shelf stable with like nuts and coffees and things. Those experiments have varying levels of success. I hear Happy Belly, that's the shelf stable stuff, is okay. Mama Bear has had some issues. This is like baby food. I know they've had some issues with quality because they're trying to go organic with it, and it hasn't been doing so well. So they've kind of been hit or miss with food, and they really want to get into food. I actually think it's going to be really interesting to see now that they own Whole Foods. Whole Foods has a really strong foods private label called 365. Maybe that'll be on Amazon. I don't know. But for now, it's foods and clothing. And we'll see what they get into later.
Great. Thanks. I think we're kind of out of time at this stage, so I just want to say thank you, everyone, for attending today. I think it was very interesting. There's probably a lot more that can be said about Amazon, and probably an hour isn't enough to tell the full story, but I think we got through quite a bit today. Just want to talk to you about one or two things coming up from Clavis next month's webinar. We're sticking to the Amazon theme. We have Melissa Burdick, who's formerly from the Mars Agency, who's an expert on developing playbooks for global brands in the Amazon channel, and she's going to talk to us about her experience of that. And a bit further down the road, but want to maybe put into your calendars and put a save the date in, on September 19th in London, we're going to have our annual EMEA e-commerce summit. So we'll be sending out more information about that very soon. Again, thank you very much to Tim and to Danny for presenting today, and thank you very much to all of you for attending. The slides and the recording will be sent out to you in the next couple of days once it's been sort of compiled, etc. So thank you again. Cheers.